The fifth stage mirage, unconscious competence without the come down. Here's the punchline you do not want. The minute trading feels as casual as breathing is, the minute the market starts tightening the noose while you grin like everything is under control. Unconscious competence sounds like liberation. That is exactly why it turns lethal. You describe sliding into the chair, placing trades, barely paying attention to anything else. And the machine hums. I read that line and I smell sedation dressed up as mastery. You reach for driving as the metaphor neat, simple, comforting. But roads have lanes and rules. Markets shift the asphalt while you are still rolling. On the road, muscle memory saves you. In the market, muscle memory flatters you. Right up until the tape changes. Character and the same reflex that made you look slick turns you into a slow-motion crash. No one stops because you look so sure. Muscle memory in charts feels safe because your hands move before doubt can speak. Recognizing patterns fast. Executing crisp. Exiting clean great when conditions rhyme with your training. But the moment you call it just sitting and trading, you quietly delete context. That tiny word, just, does damage. Just erases volatility regimes. Just erases liquidity conditions. Just erases the days when structure is mud. Yet the ego still wants action because autopilot whispers that it will be fine. I know the hunger under that line, the craving for pure flow where thinking becomes friction. I also know the trap wired inside it. Skill was built. Immunity was not purchased. You did not become bulletproof. You just got better at ignoring the sound of bullets. Then you drop the soft poison. 100 pips a trade becomes easy and normal. Easy turns the guard dog into a houseplant. Normal turns tail, risk into wallpaper. Say those two words a few times and watch expectation install itself as the default. That is how entitlement sneaks in wearing your jersey. Yesterday's stretch becomes today's baseline, and anything less feels like failure. So the mind leans forward. Size creeps. Stops, loosen half a breath. And the risk profile mutates while the face stays calm. I hear the tone between your lines, the casual flex, the shrug that says, "This is what I do." That sentence is not a process. That sentence is an identity oath. And an oath like that does not break cleanly. It snaps you with it when the market refuses to pay your easy and normal dividend. You write that emotions are handled and the account grows quickly. That pairing is the tell. Real composure is quiet and slow. Rapid growth is loud and persuasive. Put them together and you get a polished exterior with a hidden throttle. Quick growth convinces the brain that acceleration is the new baseline. It also tempts a silent rewrite of the rules, never on paper, always in the head. Still disciplined, you will say, while the definitions of patience, selectivity, and acceptable drawdown soften by a hair each week. The wine, numbers keep smiling. So who argues? That is the dangerous lullaby. Outcomes look fine. So assumptions get a free pass. The ritual stays the same. The risk has drifted. By the time you notice, the exposure is not what you think it is. It is what your language has allowed it to become. Now, the social elevation. You start a room. People listen. Questions flood in. And you recognize your old stage 2 self staring at you from every microphone. That scene is honest and loaded. Authority is leverage all by itself. Every nod aimed at you adds weight to your next decision. You are no longer trading alone. You are performing conviction for an audience hungry for certainty on demand. The room turns you into a lighthouse and a prisoner. The applause says the engine is flawless, so the gas stays pressed to keep the narrative intact. The more people listen, the harder it becomes to say, "No trade," even when nothing lines up. That is not malice. That is inertia, dressed as leadership. The drift is subtle, from process to persona, from reading risk to feeding a room that expects you to be right on schedule. And then the badge. I am a currency trader. Clean line. Feels earned. It is also the riskiest sentence in your script. Identity cuts two ways. It sharpens behavior until it refuses to adapt. When conditions bend, does the Stage 5 autopilot keep reading the tape, or does it start defending the costume? The picture you paint: effortless entries, easy hundreds, emotions tamed, balance compounding, a crowd leaning in frames, mastery as ease. I get why. Ease feels like the trophy. Here is the bitter thread your story will not pull on, if ease becomes the point. What keeps the edge sharp when ease hardens into habit? So, if ease hardens into identity, here's the rot that blooms next. Autopilot confuses speed with clarity and calls it wisdom. You say you sit down and trade without paying much attention to everything else. No worries. Right. That line is the tell. Everything else is where the hidden costs live. Liquidity texture, spread behavior, session rhythm. Who is actually moving the book? Those sit inside everything else. When the process gets unconscious, the eyes stop interrogating the tape and start skimming it. That skimming feels like elite intuition because it is fast. It is also blind to drift until the slap lands. The scary part is not the loss. The scary part is how smoothly the loss slides through the same pathway that once printed wins. The reflex does not ask permission. It fires. Then it explains the outcome after the fact and swears it saw it coming. Easy and normal 100 pips reads like a victory chant and functions like a booby trap. The number turns into a brand in your head. 100 equals success. Less than that equals underperformance. More equals confirmation that the engine is blessed. The distribution of outcomes does not care about that brand. The variance is not impressed by your round number. But the language you chose carries a loaded promise, and promises shape patience in ugly ways. When normal is 100, a clean 80 looks like settling, a 50 looks like a mistake, and a quick scratch looks like personal failure. That is how the wrist hesitates on exits, how stops move a hair, how a nothing candle gets reinterpreted as probably a fake out. The process did not degrade in a big way. It eroded by slow millimeters, while the internal scoreboard kept chanting the magic word, normal. Then there is the pair you glued together, emotions handled and the account growing quickly. That duet sells, like a premium infomercial. Composure is a steady flame. Fast growth is lighter fluid. When the two sit in the same sentence, I do not hear serenity. I hear a heart rate that learned how to hide behind good outcomes. The voice says zen. The size says hungry. And hunger in this stage does not scream. It whispers. It whispers that the context is familiar. That slippage is an edge tax. That widening a stop by a whisper is not a sin, when structure is obviously intact. The mind signs the memo because the balance curve nods along. That is how a cut your losses hard ethos gets replaced by give it a little breathing room while still using the old slogan in public to sound disciplined. The image stays clean. The plumbing gets messy. Now, the room you started. Crowds feel like proof. People only show up for signal, right? Sure. They also show up for certainty and theater. The moment the room forms, you are trading two markets, the one on the screen and the one in their heads. The second one pays in validation, and it charges in latency. You will not feel the charge at first. It shows up as reluctance to say no trade, a twitch to provide something because the chat feels itchy, a need to punctuate silence with a call so the feed does not look like dead air. You become the schedule. Calls bend toward time slots instead of conditions. That is not leadership. That is performance art. And performance art loves clean narratives. easy hundreds, emotion mastery, quick growth, steady hand. Do you see the recursive loop now? The story you told just became the prop you have to carry every session. You recognized yourself in their stage 2 questions. Of course you did. That recognition is honest and slippery. Once the room becomes an echo, it feeds the score sense that your map is the map. You start predicting who will make it and who will stall, as if you can read their future like a chart. That prediction is not analysis. It is survivorship bias, dressed in guru black. It protects the myth and screens out doubt. If they fail, it is because they were not built for it. If they succeed, it is because they followed the blueprint. Either way, the story keeps your certainty intact. Clean for the audience, comfy for the ego, lethal for the edge. Because the minute the myth has to be maintained, the process can no longer be questioned without threatening the franchise. And what happens to the edge that cannot be interrogated? It turns museum-grade pretty, static, irrelevant when the weather flips. The final line, "I am a currency trader," lands like a badge and behaves like a muzzle. The badge invites applause. The muzzle filters incoming evidence. Every inconvenient puzzle piece gets sanded until it fits the identity. Unconscious competence turns into unconscious defense of the role. The questions you should be asking about drift, about regime, about whether the reflex is mapping today's tape or yesterday's script get replaced by an instinct to protect what you have become. You wanted ease. You got a costume? And when the costume needs the market to behave, what happens the day it does not? So here is what lands when the market stops cooperating with the costume. The reflex that once looked like laser focus starts confusing familiar motion with valid signal. Your line about just sitting and trading turns the dashboard into decor. The missing piece is not talent. It is calibration. Unconscious execution without constant recalibration is like running yesterday's map on today's terrain and calling the potholes noise. I hear your ease and see the blind spot. The system inside you keeps firing, but the feedback loop that used to tune it has been muted by comfort. And comfort is cruel. It only shows its bill after it's already been comped by a string of wins. That one sentence about 100 pips being easy and normal, there is the hidden leverage. The number is no longer an outcome. It is a narrative anchor. Anchors do not ask questions. They drag everything back to their weight. Entries get graded against the anchor. Exits get delayed by the anchor. Even your silence in flat conditions gets pulled by the anchor because the brand in your head needs a fresh scorecard. You wanted a clean routine. You got a quiet addiction to round numbers. When the tape offers half that move with clear structure, you will feel underpaid and let it ride. When the tape struggles, you will feel disrespected and push it anyway. That is not edge. That is entitlement with a nice haircut. Then the claim that emotions are handled while the balance grows quickly. Clean slogan. Messy plumbing. If the account is compounding fast, the nervous system is not suddenly made of ice. It is simply being rewarded faster than it can register risk. Honestly, the body still reacts. It just does it behind the curtain. Micro hesitations in exits. Micro justifications on stops. Micro escalations in size, all tiny. All deniable. All stacking. The public voice still says, cut your losses hard. But the private voice starts whispering, give it a breath because it worked last week. That is how unconscious competence quietly morphs into unconscious tolerance for slippage of rules, not ticks. The mismatch is subtle until it isn't. And by then, the narrative has an alibi for everything. Regime shift, randomness, bad fill, anything but the erosion that happened under your own language. Your trading room seals the loop. You built a stage, and now certainty is the content. The audience is not the villain. The schedule is. Calls want to land at the top of the hour, not when the tape says go. Silence feels like failure. So, airtime gets filled with opinion that sounds like signal. You called it leadership. I hear latency waiting to be punished. The more you are listened to, the more your system optimizes for clarity over accuracy, for theater over risk asymmetry. The performance tax does not show up on a statement. It shows up as a gradual preference for clean-looking trades over ugly but valid ones. Clean is good for the room. Ugly is often where the actual edge lives. Guess which one an unconscious performer keeps picking? Then the part where you recognize your old stage 2 self in their questions. That recognition is human and dangerous. It makes the path look linear. Linear paths breed templates. Templates feel merciful to the audience and flattering to the teacher. They are poison to adaptation. By predicting who will graduate and who will stall, the brain installs a neat story. Talent plus discipline equals mastery. End credits roll. The story is tidy. The market is not. The moment your own progression becomes a universal script, you stop interrogating whether your reflexes were built in a specific volatility climate and are now being deployed in a different one. Survivorship bias does the rest, and it loves the energy of a profitable host. Finally, the proud sentence, "I am a currency trader." I hear the victory and see the trap. Identity cleans the mirror until it no longer reflects. Every outlier becomes an exception. Every drawdown, a test of faith. Every valid critique, a personal insult. The role shields the method from scrutiny because the role feels hard-earned, and hard-earned things feel sacred. But markets do not care about sacred. They do not kneel to your badge or salute your room. When unconscious competence hardens into unconscious defense, what exactly is left to evolve? What part of the process can still be broken and rebuilt without threatening the altar you have built to yourself? You frame this stage as effortless rotation, sit, trade, scale, teach, repeat. I am telling you the hidden repetition is different. Anchor, rationalize, perform, ossify. One is the dream. The other is the mechanism. And when the mechanism is this tight, how does the dream survive the kind of tape that refuses to respect your 100 pip mythology, your quick growth timeline, your room's need for clean calls, and your badge's need for applause? Here is the split screen you never framed, on the left. The glossy version of Stage 5, where execution is smooth. 100 pips feel like pocket change. Emotions sit in a neat little cage. The balance leaps. The room listens, and the badge glows. On the right, the untelevised version, where each of those lines hides a friction you stopped measuring because the story got prettier than the tape. You called it unconscious competence. I see unconscious deletion. Deletion of context. Deletion of variance. Deletion of the little alarms you used to hear before the winds made your ears selective. The difference between the two screens is not knowledge. It is vigilance. One screen runs on a narrative that never asks for proof. The other runs on proof that refuses to wear a narrative. Compare the metaphors you chose with the mechanics you skipped. Driving works because lanes exist, and other drivers mostly honor them. The market you trade is allergic to lanes. It bends microstructure, flips session tone, and punishes mass belief with surgical glee. Naive thinking loves the comfort of repetition. Sit, click, collect. Harsh reality loves the inconvenience of drift, regime, liquidity, sentiment, all sliding without a press release. When you say you barely pay attention to everything else, you plant your flag in repetition and pretend drift is a side character. That is not mastery. That is a clean camera angle hiding the off-screen noise. Now the 100 pips headline. Naive thinking treats that round number like a wage. Harsh. Reality treats it like a path-dependent accident that sometimes shows up and often does not. The naive view argues that a normal move should be harvested because skill says so. The harsh view asks whether today's structure even carries that distance without nasty mean reversion, and whether the asymmetric slice was already taken halfway through. The naive view keeps the position to defend a target. The harsh view defends the distribution. The first keeps the ego safe. The second keeps the account intact. Which one did your easy and normal language just recruit? You tie emotions handled to fast compounding like they are soulmate concepts. Naive thinking hears tranquility. Harsh reality hears repression. Real composure sits inside small, boring repetitions. Fast growth is a spotlight that cooks the actor while everyone claps. The naive angle is proud of not flinching. The harsh angle asks why the eyes are not blinking when the light is that bright. If fear truly shrank, why did the definitions of a valid hold stretch? If respect for risk truly deepened, why did the stop have to widen by a whisper? Those whispers are the hidden corners, the shift from cut your losses hard to give it air. The upgrade from a strict risk unit to a Vital One, vibe-based nudge. The quiet inflation of size that never makes it into the speech but always leaks into the fills. Then the room. Naive thinking says community proves competence and multiplies it. Harsh reality says audience pressure turns timing into television. The naive mind celebrates clarity. The harsh mind watches accuracy. Get trimmed to fit the show. A clean call on schedule is candy. An ugly asymmetric setup at a weird hour is vegetables. Guess which one the performer version of you keeps serving. The hidden corner here is latency by pride, waiting for a setup that photographs well enough to maintain the image, then calling that patience. Meanwhile, the real edge that does not look like a poster walks by without a camera. You recognize your past self in their stage 2 questions. Naive thinking converts that recognition into prophecy. Some will make it, many will not. The map is known. Harsh reality calls it a trap, where survivorship bias sanctifies your path and freezes your reflexes. The hidden corner is simple. Seeing your old face in their confusion blinds you to the unrepeatable parts of your story. You stop asking whether your edge grew up in a specific volatility climate and start pretending it is climate-proof because it worked for you. That is not mentoring. That is mythology maintenance. And the badge, I am a currency trader. Naive thinking says the identity is armor. Harsh reality says it is porcelain. Armor gets tested. Porcelain gets pampered. Which object are you protecting when the tape refuses to play your song? If the stage 5 costume prefers applause to recalibration, what kind of exit is left that does not shatter the mirror you spent so long polishing? So, if the split screen shows the dream on the left and the mechanism on the right, and the right side keeps winning when nobody is watching, what lens can even make stage 5 worth keeping without the costume swallowing the edge? Here is the alternative lens that does not flatter the costume. Stage 5 only works if unconscious competence is paired with conscious doubt on a timer. Not the anxious kind, the surgical kind. The text you gave plays like a lullaby sit. Trade. 100 pips, easy. Emotions tamed. Balance accelerating. Room applauding. Identity cemented. The exit from that lullaby is not a new system or a fresh mascot. It is a structural rewrite of how the story is allowed to talk to you. When easy and normal shows up, it gets treated like a suspect, not a badge. When handled emotions sits next to quick growth, the duet gets audited for hidden leverage. When the room leans in, silence becomes a signal, not a failure. When I am a currency trader tries to end the sentence, the period becomes a question mark that asks who is trading whom. Flip the anchor. If 100 pips is easy and normal in your narrative, the alternative lives in language that refuses to assign a quota to today's tape. The number becomes a statistic with no pride attached. The reflex still fires, but it runs through a filter that asks whether this read belongs to this session's character or to yesterday's highlight reel. No drama, No slogans. Just a small gate that does not open for ego. The gate does not respect round numbers. It respects structure and variance without pretending either of them owes you anything. That tiny reroute breaks the addiction to a tidy wage and replaces it with a tolerance for messy but honest outcomes. The escape is not to trade smaller or louder. The escape is to stop letting a round number wage your identity. Rewire the emotions line. You paired serene nerves with fast compounding like they were blood brothers. A cleaner pairing is serene nerves with slow definitions. Not slow results, slow definitions. The definition of a valid hold does not widen because a week was hot. The definition of a hard cut does not soften because last Thursday bounced. The unconscious part of you still moves fast. The conscious part moves slow and refuses to evolve because the chart was flirty at the open. That is not romantic. That is boring. Boring is how edges do not bleed while the public speech stays tidy. You still get to say, cut your losses hard. Except now the plumbing matches the slogan on bad days, not just the good ones. Detox the room. The stage 5 storyline turns the room into a mirror that feeds the myth. The alternative turns the room into a laboratory. In a lab, no trade is not dead air. It is a data point that says conditions are junk. In a lab, a call does not exist to meet a schedule. The schedule exists to watch a regime. In a lab, ugly setups that fit the real edge get recorded, even if they are visually unsexy. The lab does not applaud. It measures. The performer hates that. The trader needs it. The escape here is subtle. The audience still hears you. But what they hear is a process that keeps its right to be quiet, not a persona that keeps its right to be right. Defang the badge. I am a currency trader reads clean until the badge starts negotiating with evidence. The alternative is a badge that expires by default unless renewed by behavior, not by profit, not by applause, not by a brochure number like 100 pips, by behavior that looks like calibration under pressure. The identity does not go away. It earns daylight each session without demanding the environment bend to it. That way, when the market changes, the costume does not have to be defended. The method does. You can still walk tall, but the height comes from posture, not a cardboard crown. Keep the reflex. Chain it to questions. The reflex is your prize. Killing it is not the plan. The plan is a tiny friction that forces the reflex to answer for the context. Not a speech, not a ritual, just a quiet check that resets the narrative's favorite shortcuts. Does this setup belong to today's liquidity tone or to last month's? Is the exit defined by structure or by that round number that photographs well? Would I still like this trade if the room were empty and the badge were off for 24 hours? If the reflex still wants it after those questions, fine. If it starts stuttering, even better. Stuttering is not weakness. It is proof the costume is not steering. So, if the exit route is a language change, a lab mindset, and an identity that renews itself instead of defending itself, what does reinforcement look like when the next winning streak shows up and tries to turn the guard dog back into a houseplant? Reinforcement is not a victory lap. It is a pressure test that keeps the costume from swallowing the method when the wind starts singing again. Stage 5 in your script reads like light, work sit, trade, easy hundreds, emotions quiet, curve steep, room nodding, badge polished. Keep the music. Add a metronome, language that refuses to crown outcomes, calibration that stays noisy on purpose, and an identity that can expire if behavior stops earning daylight. Without that tick, ease becomes doctrine, and doctrine cannot hear drift. When the streak returns, the anchor sneaks back with a halo. Easy and normal is its opener. Reinforcement treats that phrase like a flare automatic downgrade of certainty the moment it appears. The market does not pay salaries. It hands out distributions. 100 is a tail, not a wage. The reflex still fires, but the aftertaste to notice is entitlement. If entitlement shows up, structure is no longer in charge. Then, the duet you paired emotions handled and balance accelerating. They can share a sentence without sharing a bloodstream. Composure is a baseline. Compounding is a weather pattern. The harmony holds only if definitions did not stretch during the hot week. If a hard cut became a soft nudge because the curve looked heroic. Reinforcement snaps the rule back without ceremony. That is how cut your losses hard stops being merchandising and returns to being plumbing. Now the room. It will cheer again. Let it. Reinforcement protects silence from shame. No trade is respect, not dead air. When the schedule wants a call and the tape refuses, the lab framing converts restraint into data rather than guilt. The audience learns the rhythm, and the process keeps its teeth. Clean narratives will still tempt crisp entries that photograph well, but reinforcement pays the ugly setup that fits the distribution and ignores the camera. Performance tax trades accuracy for applause. Reinforcement refuses the bargain. Authority still distorts mirrors. When you recognize your stage 2 face in their questions, the reinforcement lens blocks prophecy. Your path was a timestamp, not a template. The badge "I am a currency trader" stays on your chest, printed on dissolving paper that renews under behavior, not applause. Calibration is the only mentor that does not lie on winning streaks. So, the harmony you want is not a detour. It is a subtext that refuses to lie for the text. Sit down, trade, keep the reflex alive, and let doubt ride shotgun with the safety off. 100 is not a promise. It is a possibility. Emotions handled means the thermostat works when the room heats up, not that steel cooled forever. Fast growth is a reason to keep the fire marshal on shift. The room is a lab with a microphone. The badge is a receipt that expires every session unless paid by calibration. End sharp, not soft. Stage 5 is either a living method with a built-in metronome or a costume that begs for applause while the edge rusts. Keep the language unfriendly to entitlement. Keep the calibration hungry for drift. Keep the identity willing to expire when it stops earning daylight. And the autopilot actually earns its flight plan. Let easy and normal narrate the show, and the plan flies itself into whether it refused to read. That is the fork already named, method or costume, edge or theater, calibration or comfort. If this hit home, pass it to a buddy who thinks ease equals edge. Subscribe to Mind Over Markets so you do not miss the next razor-sharp breakdown when the costume tries to come back and call itself mastery. Or keep it private and let the itch do its work the next time. Easy and normal whispers in your ear. Either the method breathes and the costume burns, or the costume breathes and the method dies. Choose the silence you can live with when the room goes quiet and the tape keeps moving without you.